There's a kind of desperation that strips away every illusion you've ever had about yourself, every story you told yourself about who you are and what you'd never do. Elena knew that desperation intimately. She'd lived with it for 3 months, watching it grow like a shadow that followed her everywhere, darker each day, heavier each night, until it became the only thing she could see. It wasn't the desperation of wanting more, of craving luxury or comfort. It was the desperation of survival, the kind that makes you realize you're one decision away from losing everything that matters. And on a cold Tuesday night in March, standing outside a hotel she'd never have entered in any other life, Elena made that decision. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from. And if you feel it was really worth it, consider becoming a member to get early access to upcoming stories. Your support makes all the difference. The hotel lobby smelled of expensive cologne and fresh lilies, a scent that made Elena's stomach turn, not because it was unpleasant, but because it belonged to a world she'd never been part of, a world that had always existed on the other side of glass, visible but untouchable. She stood just inside the revolving door, her hands clutching a small purse that contained nothing but her ID, her phone with 3% battery, and the last $20 she had to her name. She wore the only dress she owned that could pass for elegant, a simple black sheath she'd bought for her college graduation 3 years ago, when she still believed in futures and plans, and the idea that hard work meant something. The dress hung differently now. She'd lost weight. Not the intentional kind, not the kind that comes from green smoothies and gym memberships, but the kind that comes from choosing between groceries and rent, between eating and keeping the lights on, between survival and surrender. Elena was 24, though she felt decades older. She had the kind of beauty that people noticed, but never celebrated. Soft brown hair that fell in waves she never styled, dark eyes that seemed too large for her face, a mouth that forgot how to smile. Somewhere between her mother's diagnosis and the second mortgage and the moment the hospital called to say there was nothing more they could do. She'd been alone for 6 months now, alone with grief, alone with debt, alone with the kind of poverty that doesn't announce itself with dramatics, but creeps in slowly, methodically, taking small pieces of your dignity until one day you wake up and realize you'd sell anything, give anything, become anything, just to make it stop. The arrangement had been made through a friend of a friend, the kind of whispered conversation that happens in dark corners of desperation. Someone who knew someone who could help. One night, $10,000. No names, no complications, just survival wrapped in a transaction that would cost her the one thing she'd never imagined she'd have to give. Elena hadn't hesitated as long as she should have. That was the thing about true desperation. It didn't give you time to think, to consider, to maintain the illusions of choice. You just acted. You just survived. She'd arrived early, too nervous to time it perfectly. And now she stood in the lobby trying to look like she belonged, trying to match the confidence of the women who moved through this space like they owned it. A man in a crisp suit approached her, not the one she was supposed to meet, but someone who worked for him. He was polite, efficient, terrifyingly professional. He gestured toward the elevators without a word, and Elena followed, because turning back now meant going home to an empty apartment with an eviction notice and her mother's medical bills and the crushing weight of having tried everything and failed anyway. The elevator rose in silence. 23rd floor. The hallway was empty, carpeted in deep burgundy, lit by sconces that cast everything in warm gold. The man stopped at a door at the end of the hall, knocked twice, then left without looking at her. Elena stood alone in that hallway for what felt like hours, but was probably seconds, her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat, in her fingertips, in every terrified cell of her body. The door opened, and everything Elena thought she knew about this night, about survival, about the cost of desperation, shattered in the space of a breath. He was not what she expected. She'd imagined someone old, someone cruel-looking, someone whose face would match the transaction, would make it easier to disconnect, to pretend she was somewhere else. But the man standing in the doorway was young, maybe early 30s, tall with broad shoulders that filled the frame, dark hair slightly too long, eyes so dark they were almost black. He wore a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, no tie, no jacket, as if he'd been waiting in comfort rather than formality. And his face, God, his face was beautiful in a way that made the whole thing worse, because beauty shouldn't be part of this, shouldn't complicate what was supposed to be simple and transactional and survivable. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, then stepped back to let her enter. The suite was massive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that probably cost more than Elena's entire year of rent, everything clean and expensive and cold. He closed the door behind her, and the sound of the lock clicking into place felt final, like the closing of something she'd never be able to open again. "You're early," he said. His voice was low, textured, with an accent she couldn't quite place, something European maybe, something that suggested he'd lived in many places and belonged to none of them. "I'm sorry," Elena said automatically, then hated herself for apologizing, for starting this, with deference and fear. He moved past her toward the windows, and she noticed the way he walked, controlled, precise, like someone who'd trained his body to reveal nothing. "Don't apologize," he said without looking at her. "It's refreshing. Most people who come here are never early, never nervous." Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She stood near the door, her purse clutched in front of her like a shield, trying to breathe normally, trying to remember why she was here, what was at stake, what she was willing to do to survive. He turned to face her then, leaning against the window frame, and the city lights behind him created a halo effect that made him look almost unreal. "What's your name?" he asked. Elena hesitated. The arrangement had been clear. No names, no personal details, nothing that could create connection or complication. But something in his tone, in the way he asked, made refusal feel impossible. "Elena," she said quietly. He nodded, as if confirming something he already knew. "Elena," he repeated, and the way he said it, careful and deliberate, made it sound like a word in a language she'd never heard before. "I'm Dante." She didn't want to know his name, didn't want this to be anything other than what it was supposed to be, a transaction, a means to an end, something she could file away and forget. But now she had his name, and somehow that made everything different. Dante moved away from the window, walking toward a bar cart in the corner of the room. "Would you like a drink?" he asked, his back to her. "I don't drink," Elena lied. The truth was she couldn't afford to drink, couldn't afford to let her guard down even a fraction, couldn't afford to make this anything other than what it had to be. He poured himself something amber, 2 fingers in a crystal glass, then turned back to her. "You're scared," he observed. Not a question, just a fact delivered without judgment. "I'm fine," Elena said, and her voice shook just enough to betray her. Dante took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving her face. "No, you're not. But that's okay. Fear is honest." He moved closer, and Elena forced herself not to step back, not to show just how terrified she actually was. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could smell him, something clean and expensive, wood, and something darker, something that reminded her of smoke. "I'm going to tell you something," Dante said, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. "And I need you to listen carefully." Elena nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "You can leave right now. I'll have someone take you home. You'll still get the money. No questions, no consequences, no debt. You walk out that door, and this never happened." Elena stared at him, confusion cutting through her fear. "I don't understand." "I'm giving you a choice," Dante said simply. "Real choice. Not the kind backed by desperation or necessity. If you stay, it's because you want to, not because you have to. That matters to me." Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. Choice. When was the last time she'd had a real choice? When was the last time survival hadn't been the only option? "Why?" she managed to ask. Dante finished his drink, set the glass down on a nearby table. "Because I've done many things in my life, Elena. Terrible things. Things that keep me awake at night. But I won't add forcing a desperate woman to my list. So decide. Stay or go. But decide freely. She should leave." Every logical part of her brain screamed at her to take the money and run, to escape while she still could. But logic had stopped working months ago. Somewhere between the funeral and the foreclosure notices, and the crushing weight of being completely alone in a world that didn't care if she lived or died. And standing here, looking at this dangerous, beautiful man who just offered her something no one else had in so long, she realized she didn't want to leave. Not because of the money, though God knows she needed it, but because for the first time in 6 months, someone was looking at her like she was a person. Not a problem, not a burden, not a failure. "I'm staying," Elena said, and her voice was steadier than she expected. Something flickered in Dante's eyes, something she couldn't name. "Okay," he said quietly. "Then we should talk." He gestured to the sofa, and Elena moved toward it on shaking legs, sitting on the edge like she might need to run at any moment. Dante sat in a chair across from her, maintaining distance, and somehow that made her relax fractionally. "Tell me why you need the money," he said. It wasn't part of the arrangement. She wasn't supposed to share her story, her reasons, her desperation. But he'd given her choice, and something about that made her want to give him truth in return. "My mother died 6 months ago," Elena began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Cancer. We didn't have insurance, not good insurance anyway. And the bills, they just kept coming. I took out loans, used credit cards, borrowed from everyone I knew. I thought I could handle it. I thought if I just worked hard enough, took enough shifts, sacrificed enough, I could save her. But I couldn't." She paused, swallowing against the tightness in her throat. "She died anyway, and I was left with debt I'll never be able to repay. I lost my apartment last month. I've been staying with a friend. But I can't anymore. I'm out of options, out of time, out of everything." Dante listened without interrupting, his dark eyes fixed on her face, with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said finally, and it sounded like he meant it. "For your loss, for your circumstances, for the fact that you ended up here." "It's not your fault," Elena said automatically. "No," Dante agreed, "but I'm still sorry." He stood, walked back to the bar cart, poured another drink. "Elena, I'm going to make you an offer. A different one." She looked up at him, confused. "The money is yours, regardless of what happens tonight. But I'd like to propose something else." He returned to his chair, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Stay with me. Not just tonight. For as long as you need. I have resources, connections. I can make your debt disappear. I can give you time to rebuild, to figure out what comes next. No strings, No expectations beyond your presence. Elena couldn't process what he was saying. I don't understand. Why would you do that? Dante's expression shifted, something dark and honest crossing his features. Because I recognize desperation when I see it. I've lived it in different ways, for different reasons. And because I'm a selfish man, Elena. I'm offering you help, yes, but I'm not noble. I'm not good. I want something in return. Her stomach dropped. What do you want? Your time, Dante said simply. Your company. The ability to pretend, for a while, that I'm not the man I actually am. Elena stared at him, trying to understand. I don't know what that means. Dante stood, walked to the windows, his back to her again. I'm not a good man, Elena. I run an organization that operates outside the law. I make decisions that hurt people. I live in violence and darkness, and I've made peace with that. But sometimes, in quiet moments, I want to pretend I'm someone else. Someone who could have a normal conversation over dinner. Someone who could sit in silence with another person and not calculate threats or exits or angles. Someone who could just be. He turned to face her, and his expression was so raw it took her breath away. You need safety and resources. I need a reprieve from being who I am. We can help each other. It was insane. Everything about this was insane. Elena should run, should take the money he'd offered and disappear into the night and never look back. But she'd come here tonight, prepared to sell herself for survival, and instead, this dangerous man was offering her something infinitely more complicated, infinitely more terrifying. He was offering her a life, temporary, conditional, built on a foundation of mutual need, but a life nonetheless. How long? She asked. As long as it takes, Dante answered, for you to get back on your feet. For me to, I don't know, remember what it feels like to be something other than what I've become. A month, 6 months, a year, however long we both need. And if I say yes, what exactly are you expecting? Elena needed to know, needed to understand what she was agreeing to. Dante moved closer, but kept his distance, respecting the space between them. I expect honesty. I expect your presence when I ask for it. I expect you to be yourself, not some version you think I want to see. Beyond that, nothing you're not willing to give freely. Elena looked at him, this beautiful, dangerous man who'd somehow turned a transaction into something else entirely, something she didn't have words for. She thought about her empty apartment, her maxed-out credit cards, the collection agencies that called 15 times a day. She thought about her mother's grave that she hadn't been able to afford a headstone for. She thought about the last 6 months of grinding, relentless survival that had brought her to this hotel room, to this moment, to this impossible choice. Okay, she said quietly. I'll stay. Dante's shoulders dropped fractionally, like he'd been holding tension she hadn't noticed. Okay, he echoed. He crossed to a desk in the corner, pulled out a folder, brought it back to her. These are the arrangements. The debt is paid as of tomorrow morning. There's an apartment, fully furnished, in a building I own. It's yours for as long as you need it. There's a bank account in your name with enough to live comfortably. All I ask is that when I call, you answer. When I need you, you come. And that you don't lie to me. About anything. Elena took the folder with trembling hands, opened it to see paperwork that looked official and overwhelming and impossible. This is too much, she whispered. It's practical, Dante corrected. I don't do anything halfway, Elena. If you're going to be part of my life, even peripherally, you need to be taken care of. I won't have you vulnerable. It's not safe. Safe from what? She asked, even though part of her didn't want to know. Dante's expression hardened. From the world I live in. From the people who would use you to get to me. From everything. Elena should be terrified. Every self-preservation instinct should be screaming at her to run. But instead, sitting in this expensive hotel suite with this dangerous man who'd somehow seen her, really seen her, she felt something she hadn't felt in so long she'd forgotten what it was called. She felt hope. "What happens now?" Elena asked. Dante glanced at his watch. "Now, you go home. Pack whatever you want to keep. Tomorrow morning, someone will come to move you to your new place. Tomorrow night, I'll take you to dinner. We'll start figuring out how this works." "That's it?" Elena couldn't hide her surprise. "That's it," Dante confirmed. "I told you, Elena, I'm not interested in taking what isn't offered freely. Tonight was supposed to be different, yes. But that was before I met you. Before I saw you." "Saw what?" she asked, confused. Dante moved closer, finally closing the distance between them, and reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was gentle, reverent, and Elena's breath caught. "I saw someone who survived everything that should have broken her," he said softly. "I saw strength pretending to be fear. I saw someone worth knowing, not using. And I don't meet people worth knowing very often in my line of work." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She'd been holding back all night, all month, all 6 impossible months. "I'm not strong," she whispered. "I'm barely holding on." "Holding on is the strength," Dante said. "Surviving is the strength. Being here, making impossible choices, refusing to disappear. That's strength, Elena, even if you can't see it yet." A tear slipped down her cheek, and Dante wiped it away with his thumb, his touch so careful it made her want to cry harder. "Go home," he said gently. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow starts different. Better. I promise." Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Dante walked her to the door, and before she left, he handed her a phone. "This is yours? My number is programmed in. You need anything, day or night, you call me. Understand?" "Yes," Elena managed. "Good." He opened the door, and Elena stepped into the hallway, feeling like she was stepping between worlds, between the life she'd been barely surviving and something new, something terrifying and impossible, and maybe, just maybe, worth the risk. The apartment Dante provided wasn't just an apartment, it was a sanctuary. 22nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a part of the city Elena had only ever seen from the outside. Furniture that looked like it belonged in magazines. A kitchen with appliances she didn't know how to use. Everything was cream and soft gray and gentle light, designed for comfort and safety and peace. Elena stood in the middle of the living room on her first morning there, surrounded by the few boxes that contained everything she owned, and tried to understand how her life had changed so completely in the space of 12 hours. The phone Dante had given her sat on the counter, silent and somehow ominous. He'd said he would call, but when? What would he expect? What had she actually agreed to? She spent the morning unpacking, though it didn't take long. 3 years of life reduced to half a dozen boxes, clothes that needed replacing, books she'd kept from college, a few photos of her mother that she could barely look at without falling apart. By noon, she was done, and the apartment still looked mostly empty, like she was visiting rather than living there. She made coffee in the expensive machine, stood by the windows watching the city move below her, and tried to remember the last time she'd felt this untethered, this uncertain about what came next. Her old life had been terrible, yes, but at least it had been predictable. She knew how to survive poverty, how to navigate desperation. This, whatever this was, she had no map for. The phone rang at 2 in the afternoon, and Elena jumped like she'd been shocked. Dante's name appeared on the screen, and she stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Hello?" "Elena," His voice was warm through the speaker, less formal than the night before. "How's the apartment?" "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "Too beautiful. I'm afraid to touch anything." He laughed, a low sound that made something in her chest flutter. "Touch everything. Break things if you want. It's yours. That's the point." Elna smiled despite herself. "I'm not going to break your expensive furniture." "Our first disagreement," Dante said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I'll pick you up at 7. Wear something comfortable. We're not going anywhere fancy." "Okay," Elena agreed, then hesitated. "Dante?" "Yes?" "Why are you doing this?" She had to ask, had to understand. There was a pause, long enough that she thought maybe he'd hung up. Then he spoke, his voice quieter, more serious. "Because I'm tired, Elena. Tired of being alone in rooms full of people. Tired of conversations that mean nothing. Tired of being the thing everyone fears. And last night, when you stood in that hallway, terrified, but refusing to run, I saw someone who understood what it means to be tired of surviving. I thought maybe we could be tired together for a while. Maybe that would be easier." Elena's throat tightened. "Yeah," she whispered. "Maybe it would be." 7, Dante repeated. "I'll see you then." Elena spent the afternoon in a state of nervous preparation. She'd brought exactly one nice outfit, a simple navy dress she'd worn to job interviews back when she thought she'd find something better, something that would save her. She showered in the enormous bathroom with its rainfall showerhead and heated floors, dried her hair until it fell in soft waves, applied the minimal makeup she owned. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone who looked less exhausted than she'd been in months, and that alone felt like a small miracle. Dante arrived exactly at 7, and when Elena opened the door, she had to remind herself to breathe. He wore dark jeans and a black sweater that fit him in a way that should be illegal, his hair slightly damp, like he'd also just showered. He looked younger than the night before, less guarded, and somehow that made him more dangerous. "You look beautiful," he said, and it didn't sound like a line or a compliment designed to manipulate. It sounded true. "Thank you," Elena said, grabbing her jacket and the small purse Dante had left for her, which she'd discovered contained more cash than she'd seen in years. "You didn't have to put money in here." "Yes, I did," Dante said as they walked to the elevator. "You need to feel independent, like you have choices. Money provides that. Don't argue with me about it." Elena wanted to argue, but something in his tone told her it would be pointless. The elevator descended in silence, and when they stepped out into the parking garage, Elena stopped short. The car waiting for them was sleek and black and expensive, but that wasn't what made her pause. It was the man standing beside it, clearly a driver, clearly armed based on the bulge under his jacket, clearly there as protection. "Is that necessary?" she asked quietly. Dante's expression hardened slightly. "Yes. Always. That's part of what I am, Elena. Part of what you need to understand." The restaurant wasn't fancy like Elena expected. It was small, family-owned, the kind of place where everyone seemed to know Dante, where the owner came out to greet them personally, speaking rapid Italian that Dante answered fluently. They were led to a private table in the back, tucked away from the main dining room, quiet and intimate. "You speak Italian," Elena observed as they sat. "Among other languages," Dante said. "Necessary in my line of work." "Which is what, exactly?" Elena asked. She'd agreed to this arrangement without really knowing who Dante was, what he did, why he needed armed drivers. Now, sitting across from him in the soft lighting of this hidden corner, she wanted answers. Dante leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You really want to know?" "Yes," Elena said firmly. "If I'm going to be part of your life, even peripherally, I should understand what that means." Dante nodded slowly. I run an organization that controls most of the illegal activity in this city. Gambling, protection, smuggling. We handle things that can't be handled through legal channels. We solve problems for people who have nowhere else to turn. And yes, sometimes that involves violence. Sometimes it requires being ruthless. It's not a world you want to be part of, Ilona. But by being with me, you're adjacent to it. That's why the security. That's why the rules. Elena absorbed this, trying to reconcile the gentleman who'd given her a choice with the criminal he was describing. Have you killed people? She asked quietly. Dante didn't flinch. Yes. How many? Enough that I stopped counting. The honesty was brutal, but Elena appreciated it more than comfortable lies would have been. And you're telling me this because? Because you deserve to know who I am, Dante said. What I am. I won't lie to you, Elena. Not about this. If you want to leave, if this is too much, I'll take you home right now, and we'll part ways. No judgment, no consequences. Elena looked at this beautiful, dangerous man who'd somehow saved her from desperation and was now offering her truth instead of comfort. She should be terrified, should run, should put as much distance between herself and this world as possible. But she thought about the last 6 months, about the people who'd abandoned her when things got hard, about the system that had let her mother die and then crushed Elena under the weight of trying to save her. She thought about how alone she'd been, how invisible, how disposable. And she looked at Dante, who'd seen her, who'd given her choice, who was sitting across from her, offering brutal honesty instead of pretty lies. I'm not leaving, Elena said. Something flickered across Dante's face, relief maybe, or surprise. You're sure? No, Elena admitted. I'm not sure about anything. But I'm tired of being alone. And you said we could be tired together. I think I need that more than I need to be safe. Dante reached across the table, took her hand in his. His palm was warm, calloused, strong. Then we'll figure it out together, he said quietly. Dinner became easy after that, conversation flowing in a way Elena hadn't expected. Dante asked about her mother, and Elena found herself sharing stories she hadn't told anyone, moments of joy from before the sickness, memories she'd locked away because they hurt too much to remember. Dante listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed he was really hearing her, really caring about the answers. In return, he shared pieces of his own story, carefully curated but honest. He'd grown up poor, violent, in a world where strength was the only currency that mattered. He'd built his organization from nothing, climbed over bodies, and broken his own rules to survive. He didn't romanticize it, didn't pretend he was some noble criminal with a heart of gold. He was what he was, and he owned it completely. Do you have family? Elena asked as they shared dessert, some chocolate thing that melted on her tongue. Not anymore, Dante said, his expression closing slightly. I had a sister once. She died when I was 19. Wrong place, wrong time. Caught in someone else's war. That's when I decided I'd rather be the one controlling the violence than the one victimized by it. I'm sorry, Elena said softly. That's why you understand, she realized. Why you saw me last night. You know what it's like to lose someone and have the world keep spinning like it doesn't matter. Yes, Dante agreed. The world is brutal to people who can't protect themselves. I decided a long time ago that I'd never be powerless again, and anyone under my protection would never be powerless either. Elena understood then, really understood what he was offering. Not just money, or safety, or temporary comfort. He was offering her power in a world that had stripped her of it completely. Thank you, she said, and meant it for everything, for last night, for today, for seeing her, for offering truth, for all of it. After dinner, they walked. just walked through the city streets with Dante's security following at a discreet distance, talking about nothing important, everything important. Elena told him about her failed dreams of being a teacher, about the degree she'd earned but never got to use. Dante told her about his love of old books, how he collected first editions, and read late into the night when sleep wouldn't come. They were just two people existing in the same space, and for the first time in longer than Elena could remember, she felt almost normal. Almost like a person instead of a collection of problems and debt and grief. When Dante walked her back to her apartment, he stopped at her door, but didn't ask to come in. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said. "We can have lunch if you're free." "I'm free," Elena confirmed. She had nowhere to be, no job to rush to, nothing but time and this strange new life. Dante smiled, reached out to brush her cheek with his knuckles. "Sleep well, Elena." "You too," she whispered, then watched him walk away down the hallway, back to his life of violence and power and darkness, leaving her standing in the light of her doorway like she was something worth protecting. The next week fell into a pattern. Dante called every morning, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to make plans. They had lunch twice, dinner 3 times. He sent her books he thought she'd like, clothes that actually fit her, small gifts that showed he was paying attention to who she was. Elena started to relax, started to believe this might actually work, whatever this was. She still didn't fully understand what Dante got out of their arrangement. She was there when he called, yes, but he never asked for anything inappropriate, never pushed boundaries or expectations. They just spent time together, talking, existing, being tired together, like he'd said. It was strange and sweet, and nothing like Elena had imagined when she'd walked into that hotel room. And then, 9 days after she moved into the apartment, Dante called at 2 in the morning. His voice was tight, controlled in a way she recognized as barely contained violence. "I need you," he said simply. "Now." Elena was out of bed and dressed in 5 minutes, her heart pounding. Dante picked her up himself, no driver, driving fast through empty streets to a part of the city Elena didn't recognize. He didn't speak during the drive, his jaw clenched, his hands tight on the wheel. When they arrived at what looked like a warehouse, he finally turned to her. "There's been a problem," he said. "Someone I trusted betrayed me. I've handled it, but I need to not be alone right now. I need to remember I'm still human. Can you do that? Can you just be here?" "Yes," Elena said without hesitation. Dante led her inside to an office that was clearly his, filled with expensive furniture and weapons mounted on walls and every evidence of the violent world he lived in. He poured himself a drink with shaking hands, and that's when Elena realized he was barely holding it together. "What happened?" she asked gently. Dante drank, set the glass down hard enough that it should have shattered. "I killed someone tonight. Someone who'd worked for me for 10 years. He sold information to my enemies. Information that could have gotten people killed. People I'm responsible for protecting. So I did what had to be done." His voice was flat, mechanical, like he was reciting facts to distance himself from them. "But he had kids, Elena. A wife. And tomorrow, they'll wake up and he won't come home. And that's on me. That's what I am." Elena moved without thinking, crossing the space between them to stand in front of where he'd collapsed into a chair. She didn't know what to do, how to comfort someone who'd just killed a man, how to be what he needed. So she did the only thing she could think of. She climbed into his lap, wrapped her arms around him, and held him. Dante went rigid for a moment, then broke, his arms coming around her so tight it almost hurt, his face pressed against her shoulder. He didn't cry, but his breathing was ragged, and his whole body shook with whatever he was keeping locked inside. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered, running her fingers through his hair. "I'm sorry you have to be this. I'm sorry the world made you this. Don't apologize for me, Dante said against her shoulder, his voice rough. I chose this, every bit of it. I don't get to be sorry. Everyone gets to be sorry, Elena said firmly. Even you, especially you. They stayed like that for a long time, her holding him holding her, both of them clinging to something neither could fully name. Eventually, Dante's breathing evened out, and he pulled back slightly to look at her. This is what you signed up for, he said quietly. This darkness, this ugliness. Are you sure you want it? Elena cupped his face in her hands, made him look at her. I'm not here despite your darkness, Dante. I'm here because you showed me mine and didn't run. Because you saw me at my worst and offered me a way forward. Let me do the same for you. Something shifted in his expression, something raw and vulnerable and terrifying. Then he was kissing her, desperate and gentle all at once, like she was both salvation and destruction, and he couldn't tell which he needed more. Elena kissed him back without thinking, without analyzing, just feeling for the first time in months, letting herself want something, someone, beyond mere survival. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. I don't deserve this, he whispered. I don't deserve you. Neither of us deserves anything, Elena said. But we're here anyway. Might as well make it mean something. Dante laughed, a broken sound that was almost a sob. You're going to ruin me, Elena. Completely. Good, she said, surprising herself with the fierceness in her voice. You've earned it. They stayed in his office until dawn, talking about everything and nothing, Elena learning the pieces of him he kept hidden from everyone else. He told her about the nightmares, the weight of all the decisions he'd made, the way he sometimes looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. Elena shared her own darkness, the guilt she carried for not being able to save her mother, the shame of the choices she'd made, the fear that she'd never be anything other than someone barely surviving. As the sun started to rise, casting gold light through the warehouse windows, Dante drove her home. At her door, he caught her hand. Thank you, he said, for last night, for not running, for holding me. Always, Elena promised, and meant it in a way that terrified her. Over the next month, Elena and Dante fell into something deeper than their arrangement, something neither had planned for or wanted, but couldn't seem to stop. He called her every day, sometimes multiple times, just to hear her voice. She started keeping strange hours to match his schedule, staying up late, because that's when he was free, sleeping in because he'd kept her up until dawn talking about philosophy or books or the difference between justice and revenge. They had dinner at small restaurants where Dante was known and protected, walked through parks late at night when the world was empty, spent hours in his office while he worked, and she read, just existing in the same space like they'd done it forever. And slowly, carefully, they started touching more. A hand on the small of her back when they walked, his fingers tangling with hers during conversations, her head on his shoulder when they sat together. Nothing explicit, nothing rushed, just gradual intimacy building between two people who'd both forgotten what it felt like to be close to someone. Elena started to understand what Dante had meant about needing a reprieve from being himself. When they were together, he was softer, quieter, more human. He laughed more, smiled more, let his guard down in ways she suspected he never did with anyone else. And she realized she was giving him the same gift he'd given her, the permission to be something other than what the world had forced them to become. One night, 6 weeks after she'd moved into the apartment, Dante took her to his house. Not an apartment or a hotel, but his actual home, a modern structure tucked away in the hills outside the city. It was beautiful and cold and obviously designed for function rather than comfort. But Elena could see the pieces of him in it, the books lining the walls, the art he'd collected, the piano in the corner that he admitted he played when he couldn't sleep. "Why did you bring me here?" Elena asked as they stood in his living room, the city spread out below them through massive windows. "Because I want you to know me," Dante said simply. "All of me. Not just the parts I show the world, but the private parts too. The real parts." Elena's heart stuttered. "Why?" "Because I'm falling in love with you," Dante said, and the honesty in his voice took her breath away. "And I need you to know exactly who you'd be falling for, if you're falling at all." Elena stared at him, this dangerous, beautiful man who'd saved her and let her save him back, who'd shown her darkness and light in equal measure. "I think I've been falling since that first night," she admitted. "When you gave me a choice, when you saw me. I've been falling this whole time and didn't know how to say it." Dante crossed to her, cupped her face in his hands like she was something precious. "I'm still not a good man, Elena. That hasn't changed. I'm still going to do terrible things, make impossible choices, live in darkness." "I know," Elena said, "and I'm still broken, still grieving, still figuring out who I am after everything. That hasn't changed either." "So we're both disasters," Dante said with a small smile. "Yes," Elena agreed, "but maybe we can be disasters together." Dante kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise, and Elena felt something inside her that had been frozen since her mother died start to thaw. When he pulled back, his dark eyes were intense. "Stay with me tonight, not because of the arrangement, not because you owe me, but because you want to." "I want to," Elena whispered. That night, Elena learned what it meant to be loved by someone who'd forgotten how to be gentle, but was willing to learn. Dante touched her like she might break, like she was the most precious thing he'd ever held. And when he hesitated, asking permission with his eyes before every touch, every kiss, every step forward, Elena realized this wasn't about possession or ownership or any of the things she'd feared that first night in the hotel. This was about two broken people choosing to be vulnerable together, choosing to trust when trust had been stripped from them both. When it came time for the moment Elena had sold that night they met, she was nervous, but not afraid. Dante noticed immediately, stopping even though she could see how much he wanted to continue. "We don't have to," he said, his voice rough. "We can wait. Forever, if you need." "I don't want to wait," Elena said honestly. "But I need you to know. This is my first." Dante went very still. "Elena, that night at the hotel, you were going to give me something you'd never given anyone?" "Yes," she admitted, "because I had nothing else left to give. Nothing else worth enough to save me." Dante closed his eyes, something like pain crossing his features. "God, Elena. If I'd known, if I'd understood, I never would have. The whole arrangement was unconscionable enough without that." "But you didn't," Elena reminded him gently. "You gave me a choice. You made it about more than that. And now I'm choosing you, freely, because I want this. Want you. Is that okay?" Dante opened his eyes, and they were full of something intense and possessive and achingly tender. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Elena said, and meant it. Dante kissed her again, slow and deep, then pulled back to look at her. "Then I'll make it everything you deserve," he promised. "I'll be careful. Gentle. We'll go as slow as you need." "I trust you," Elena said, and realized it was completely true. She trusted this dangerous man who'd killed people and run a criminal empire, trusted him more than she'd trusted anyone in her life. And Dante proved worthy of that trust. He loved her with a patience and care that made her want to cry, checking in constantly, making sure she was okay, that nothing hurt, that she wanted to continue. When there was pain, he held her through it, whispering promises and reassurances until the discomfort faded into something else, something beautiful and overwhelming and perfect. Afterwards, lying tangled together in his enormous bed, Elena felt something she'd thought she'd never feel again. She felt whole, not despite what she'd lost, not despite the desperate choices that had brought her here, but because of them, because she'd survived all of it and found her way to this moment, to this man, to this unexpected love. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. Dante's arms tightened around her. "I love you too," he said. "More than I thought I could love anything." "What happens now?" Elena asked. "Now we figure out how to build a life," Dante said. "A real one. Not an arrangement or a transaction or temporary help. A real life, together, for as long as you'll have me." Elena smiled against his chest. "That might be a very long time." "Good," Dante said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I'm counting on it." The next morning, Elena woke to find Dante already awake, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm trying to figure out how I got this lucky," Dante admitted. "How I managed to find you in all the darkness." "You didn't find me," Elena pointed out. "I came to you, desperate and broken and willing to do anything to survive. And I almost destroyed something beautiful before I even knew what it was," Dante said quietly. "I think about that sometimes, about what would have happened if I'd been a worse man that night, if I'd taken what was offered instead of seeing who was offering it." "But you didn't," Elena said firmly. "You saw me. You gave me a choice. You saved me in ways that had nothing to do with money." Dante pulled her closer. "You saved me too, you know. I was drowning in what I'd become, and you reminded me I could still be human sometimes. That's worth more than anything." They spent the morning in bed, talking and touching and learning each other's bodies in the daylight. Eventually, they made their way to the kitchen, where Dante cooked breakfast with surprising skill, and they ate together on his balcony overlooking the city, both of them barefoot and happy, and more content than either had been in years. Over the following weeks, Elena moved more of her life into Dante's house. It happened gradually, naturally, until one day she realized she'd been staying there more nights than not, and Dante asked why she bothered keeping the apartment at all. "Move in," he said, "officially. Make this your home too." Elena looked around the house that had started to feel more like hers than any place she'd lived since her mother died. "Okay," she agreed, "but I get to decorate. This place is beautiful but cold. It needs warmth." Dante smiled. "Do whatever you want. It's yours now, too." So Elena made Dante's house a home. She added color and comfort, plants and photographs, pieces of herself mixed with pieces of him until the space reflected both of them. Dante's associates noticed the change in him, too. He was still dangerous, still ruthless when necessary, but there was a softness now, an ease that hadn't been there before. His second-in-command, Marco, pulled Elena aside one day when she was visiting Dante's office. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," Marco said. "I've known him 15 years, and I've never seen him like this. Happy. Human. Thank you for that." But happiness in Dante's world was always temporary, always conditional. 3 months after Elena moved in, trouble found them. A rival organization made a move on Dante's territory, and suddenly the violence that had always been abstract became very real. Elena watched Dante transform from the gentleman who made her breakfast to the cold, calculating boss who ordered hits and strategy without blinking. It was terrifying and fascinating in equal measure. One night, after a particularly brutal confrontation. Dante came home covered in blood that wasn't his. Elena met him at the door, helped him strip off his ruined clothes, led him to the shower. She stood outside while he washed away the evidence of his night, then wrapped him in a towel when he emerged, still looking haunted. "Come to bed," she said gently. "You need rest." "I need you," Dante corrected, pulling her close. "I need to remember why I'm doing this, what I'm protecting." Elena held him, and he held her back, both of them clinging to the one good thing in a world that seemed determined to stay dark. The danger escalated over the next week. Dante hired more security, insisted Elena travel with guards everywhere, barely let her out of his sight. She could see the strain in him, the weight of trying to manage a war while protecting the one thing he cared about more than power. And then, on a Tuesday morning, when Elena was supposed to be safe at home, she wasn't. She'd slipped out early to get coffee from the cafe she loved, the one a block away that Dante had declared safe. She didn't take security because it was literally a block, because she'd been feeling suffocated by constant protection, because she needed 10 minutes of normalcy. It was a mistake. She'd just ordered when two men walked in, men she didn't recognize, but who clearly recognized her. One grabbed her arm while the other pulled a gun, and before Elena could scream, they were dragging her toward the back exit. Terror didn't even begin to cover what she felt. Pure, primal fear that made her unable to think, unable to fight, unable to do anything but stumble along as they shoved her into a van. The warehouse they took her to was dark and cold and smelled like mold and rust. They tied her to a chair, not gently, and left her alone for what felt like hours. Elena's mind raced through every terrible possibility, every threat Dante had warned her about, every reason she'd been stupid to leave the house without protection. When the door finally opened, the man who walked in was older, scarred, and looking at her like she was a tool rather than a person. "You're Dante's woman," he said. "Not a question. He has 48 hours to give me what I want, or you die. Slowly, painfully, and I'll make sure he gets to watch." Elena's mouth was too dry to respond. The man laughed, a cruel sound. "Nothing to say? That's fine. You don't need to talk. You just need to bleed at the right time." He left, and Elena was alone again, trying not to panic, trying to believe Dante would find her, that this wasn't how her story ended. Dante found her in 36 hours. She heard the gunfire first, distant, then closer, then right outside the room where she was held. The door burst open, and there he was, covered in blood again, gun in hand, eyes wild, until they landed on her. "Elena," he breathed, and the relief in his voice was overwhelming. He was across the room in seconds, cutting the ropes that bound her, checking her for injuries with shaking hands. "Did they hurt you? Did they touch you?" "God, Elena, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I never should have let you. I'm so sorry." "I'm okay," Elena managed, though her voice shook. "I'm okay. You found me." "Always," Dante said fiercely. "I will always find you, always protect you. I swear it." He lifted her into his arms, carrying her out through the warehouse past bodies she tried not to look at, into the night where his men waited with vehicles. On the drive back, Dante held her so tight she could barely breathe, and she realized he was shaking. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. "For 36 hours, I thought I'd lost the only good thing in my life." "You didn't," Elena assured him. "I'm here, I'm safe." "Because I killed 12 people to get to you," Dante said. "Because I broke into their stronghold and destroyed everything they'd built. Because I proved I'm exactly the monster everyone thinks I am." Elena pulled back to look at him, this beautiful, dangerous man who'd just murdered his way across the city to save her. "You're not a monster," she said firmly. "You're my monster. There's a difference." Dante's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I can't lose you, Elena. I can't. You're the only thing keeping me human. Without you, I'm just violence and darkness and nothing else. Then it's a good thing you found me, Elena said, and that I'm not going anywhere. The aftermath was complicated. Dante's rivals were decimated, but the cost had been high, paid in blood and bodies and trauma. Elena had nightmares for weeks, waking up screaming, convinced she was still in that warehouse. Dante held her through everyone, whispering promises and reassurances until she could breathe again. And slowly, carefully, they rebuilt their sense of safety. Dante increased security until Elena felt like she lived in a fortress, but she didn't complain because she understood now, understood the reality of his world, the cost of loving someone like him. She just held him tighter and promised herself she'd never be careless with his peace again. 4 months after the kidnapping, on a quiet Sunday morning when they were both still in bed, Dante rolled over to face her with an expression Elena had never seen before. Nervous, uncertain, almost shy. I need to ask you something, he said. Okay, Elena replied, suddenly nervous too. Dante took her hand, threading their fingers together. I know this is fast. I know we haven't even been together a year. I know my world is dangerous and dark, and probably not what you imagined for your life. But Elena, I can't imagine my life without you anymore. I don't want to. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, the only thing that makes sense in all the chaos. And I want to make it official, permanent, forever if you'll let me. He pulled a small box from the nightstand, opened it to reveal a ring that was simple and beautiful and perfect. Will you marry me? Will you choose this life? Choose me. Choose us. Every day for the rest of our lives. Elena's eyes filled with tears as she looked at this man who'd saved her and let her save him back, who'd shown her that even in darkness there could be light. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. Yes, I'll marry you. I choose you. I choose us. Forever. Dante slid the ring onto her fingers, then pulled her into a kiss that was equal parts relief and joy and promise. When they broke apart, both smiling through tears, Elena laughed. My mother would have hated this, she said. You, me, all of it. I know, Dante agreed. But would you have hated it? Elena thought about the desperate girl who'd walked into a hotel room ready to sell herself for survival. Thought about the broken woman who'd been barely holding on to life. Thought about how far she'd come, how much she'd healed, how deeply she'd learned to love again. No, she said honestly. I wouldn't hate any of it, because it led me here, to you, to this life, to being someone who knows what it means to survive, and then to actually live. Dante kissed her again. Then that's all that matters. The wedding was small, private, held in Dante's home with only his closest associates and the few friends Elena had managed to keep. She wore a simple white dress that made her feel beautiful, and Dante wore a suit that made him look less dangerous and more like the man she knew he could be, the one who read poetry at 2 in the morning and made her breakfast and held her when nightmares came. When they said their vows, Dante's voice was steady, but his hands shook, and Elena felt her own tears falling as she promised to love him through darkness and light, through violence and peace, through everything their complicated life would bring. I was broken when I found you, Elena said during her vows, barely holding on, convinced I'd never be whole again. But you showed me that being broken doesn't mean being destroyed, that survival is its own kind of strength, that love can exist even in the darkest places if you're brave enough to reach for it. You made me brave, Dante. You made me want to live again. And I promise to spend the rest of my life showing you that you deserve to be loved completely, Despite everything. Because of everything. You're not too much for me. You're exactly enough. Dante's eyes were bright, with tears when he spoke. I've done terrible things, Elena. Things I can never take back, can never make right. I've hurt people, destroyed lives, lived in darkness so long I forgot what light looked like. And then we walked into my life, desperate and beautiful, and refusing to give up even when you had every reason to quit. You saw the monster I am and chose to stay anyway. You held me when I was drowning. You reminded me I was still human. I don't deserve you. I know I don't. But I'm selfish enough to keep you anyway, to love you fiercely and completely and forever. I promise to protect you with everything I have, to give you the life you deserve, to be worthy of the faith you've placed in me. You own my soul, Elena. You have from that first night. And I'm grateful for it every single day. There wasn't a dry eye in the room when they kissed, when the officiant pronounced them married, when Dante lifted Elena off the ground and spun her around like she weighed nothing, both of them laughing and crying and completely lost in each other. The reception was warm and full of joy, Dante's dangerous men becoming surprisingly sentimental as the night wore on, sharing embarrassing stories and toasting to love that survived against all odds. Elena danced with Dante until her feet hurt, his arms around her, his voice in her ear, telling her how much he loved her, how lucky he was, how he'd never let her go. That night, in their room after everyone had left, Dante carried her over the threshold, even though they already lived there, and Elena laughed at the traditional gesture from such an untraditional man. "What?" Dante asked, smiling. "You're just full of surprises," Elena said. "Always have been." "Get used to it," Dante replied. "I plan on surprising you for the next 50 years. "Is that a promise?" Elena asked. "It's a guarantee," Dante said. And then he was kissing her. And Elena forgot about everything except the feeling of being loved by someone who'd chosen her, who'd seen her at her worst and loved her anyway, who'd given her a life when she'd been prepared to sell pieces of herself just to survive. The months after the wedding settled into something that almost resembled normal, or at least as normal as life could be when married to a mob boss. Elena started volunteering at a women's shelter, using her own experience with desperation to help others find their way out. Dante supported it completely, even though it meant more security and more risk. "If it's important to you, we make it work," he said simply. She also started taking classes again, working toward the teaching degree she'd abandoned. Dante came to her presentations, sat in the back of her classrooms, looked at her like she was accomplishing something remarkable, even when all she was doing was discussing pedagogy theory. They traveled when they could, getting lost in cities where no one knew Dante's name, where they could just be a couple instead of a criminal and his wife. They spent lazy Sundays in bed, reading and talking, and making love like they had all the time in the world. They fought sometimes, usually about safety, and Elena's tendency to push boundaries Dante had set for good reason. But they always came back together, always talked through it, always chose each other even when it was hard. A year into their marriage, Elena discovered she was pregnant. She'd been feeling off for weeks, but assumed it was stress, until one morning when she threw up 3 times before breakfast, and Dante insisted she see a doctor. The news should have been terrifying. They'd never discussed children, never planned for that level of permanence and vulnerability. But when Elena told Dante, watching his face carefully for his reaction, he went very still. "Say that again," he said quietly. "I'm pregnant," Elena repeated. "About 8 weeks. I know we didn't plan this. And if you're not ready, if this is too much, we can figure out. I don't know what we can figure out, but..." Dante crossed to her in 3 long steps and kissed her so hard it took her breath away. When he pulled back, he was smiling wider than she'd ever seen. "We're having a baby." "Yes," Elena confirmed, and she was smiling too now, relieved. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it," Dante said. "Terrified, yes. Overwhelmed, absolutely. But happy? God, Elena, I never thought I'd get to have this. A family. A real family with someone I love. This is everything." Elena's pregnancy was complicated by Dante's paranoia. He hired an entire medical team to be on call 24 hours, upgraded security again, barely let Elena out of his sight. She tolerated it because she understood, because she knew how much this meant to him, how much fear lived behind his excitement. "What if I'm a terrible father?" Dante asked one night, his hand on her growing belly. "What if I can't protect them? What if I mess this up the way I've messed up everything else?" "You won't," Elena said with complete confidence. "You'll be an amazing father. You'll love this baby fiercely, and you'll teach them about strength and survival and how to live in darkness without losing your light. And I'll be right there with you, figuring it out together." Dante looked at her with such love it made her chest ache. "How did I get this lucky?" "You gave a desperate girl a choice," Elena reminded him. "You saw her when everyone else looked away. You saved her, and she saved you back. The baby is just proof that broken people can still create beautiful things." "I love you," Dante said. "So damn much." "I love you too," Elena replied. "Always." Their daughter was born on a Tuesday morning in spring, exactly 9 months after Elena found out she was pregnant. Labor was long and difficult, and Dante was a mess the entire time, holding Elena's hand so tight he probably left bruises, looking more terrified than she'd ever seen him. When the baby finally arrived, screaming and perfect and tiny, the nurse placed her in Elena's arms, and time seemed to stop. She had dark hair like Dante, Elena's eyes, and the kind of beauty that made you believe in new beginnings. "She's perfect," Elena whispered. Dante couldn't speak, just stared at his daughter, with tears streaming down his face. This dangerous man, completely undone by 8 pounds of humanity. When he finally held her, cradling her against his chest like she was made of glass, he looked at Elena with an expression of pure wonder. "Thank you," he said. "For this. For her. For giving me a reason to be better." "You're already better," Elena assured him. "You've been better since the day we met." They named her Sophia, after Dante's sister who'd died too young, and she became the center of their world. Dante was a devoted father, completely wrapped around his daughter's tiny finger from day one. He took meetings with Sophia sleeping on his chest, changed diapers with the same precision he used to plan operations, read her stories at 2 in the morning when she wouldn't sleep. Elena watched him transform from the man who'd killed 12 people to rescue her into a man who cried when Sophia smiled for the first time, and she fell in love with him all over again. Life wasn't perfect. Dante's business was still dangerous, still required violence and difficult choices, but he was more careful now, more strategic, finding ways to protect his growing family while maintaining the empire he'd built. Elena learned to live with the duality, to accept that the man who sang lullabies to their daughter was the same man who ordered hits without blinking. Both were real. Both were Dante, and she loved both versions completely. When Sophia was 6 months old, Elena woke to find Dante standing over her crib, just watching her sleep. "You okay?" Elena asked softly, moving to stand beside him. "I'm thinking about that night," Dante said. "The hotel. When you were so desperate, you were willing to give me everything just to survive. And now look at us. Look at what we built from that desperation." Elena slipped her hand into his. "Sometimes I think about it too, about how close I came to being destroyed that night, how one different choice, one different man, And none of this exists. I would have found you somehow, Dante said with complete certainty. In another life, another time. I would have found you. How can you be so sure? Elena asked. Because some people are meant to save each other, Dante said. And we were always meant for this, for each other, for her. He looked down at Sophia, then back at Elena. You own my soul, Elena. You always will. But it turns out that's not a burden. It's the greatest gift I've ever been given. Elena kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. And you own mine. Freely given. Completely yours. They stood there together, watching their daughter sleep. Two broken people who'd found each other in the darkness and built something beautiful from their shared wounds. And Elena thought about the girl she'd been, desperate and terrified, and walking into a hotel room ready to sell pieces of herself just to survive. That girl was still part of her, would always be part of her, but she wasn't that girl anymore. She was someone who'd survived the worst and found the best. Someone who'd been broken and put herself back together with love and patience and the help of a dangerous man who'd seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. Thank you, she whispered to Dante, for everything, for seeing me, for choosing me, for building this life with me. Thank you, Dante replied, for not running, for staying, for teaching me that I could be more than violence and darkness. You saved me, Elena. In every way a person can be saved. As Sophia stirred in her crib, making the small sounds that meant she'd wake soon, Elena picked her up, cradling their daughter between them. The three of them stood there in the soft light of dawn, a family built from desperation and choice and love that refused to be destroyed by circumstances. And Elena realized something important, something she wanted to remember always. She wasn't defined by her worst moments anymore, not by the debt or the grief or the night she'd been prepared to sell herself for survival. She was defined by what she'd built from those moments, by the strength it took to keep going, by the courage to reach for love when love seemed impossible. Dante had given her that, but she'd given it to herself too, by refusing to disappear, by fighting through every terrible day, by believing somewhere deep down that she deserved more than just survival. I love you both so much, Elena said, tears in her eyes. My whole world. Our whole world, Dante corrected, kissing her temple, then Sophia's head. Everything that matters. Everything I'll protect with my last breath. I know, Elena said. And she did know, completely, utterly, without doubt. The years passed in a blur of milestones and joy, and the occasional reminder that their life was built on foundations that most people would never understand. Sophia grew into a bright, fearless child who had her father's intensity and her mother's compassion. She knew, in the way children know things without being told, that her father was different from other fathers, that the men who followed them everywhere weren't just friends, that some of Daddy's work was secret and couldn't be discussed. But she never seemed bothered by it, secure in the knowledge that she was loved completely and protected absolutely. When Sophia was 5, Elena got pregnant again, and this time it was planned, wanted, celebrated. Dante was less panicked the second time around, more confident in his ability to be a father, though still overprotective in ways that made Elena roll her eyes fondly. Their son was born in winter, named Marcus after Elena's father, who died when she was young, and he completed their family in ways Elena hadn't known they needed. Life settled into a rhythm that was chaotic and beautiful and full of love. Elena finished her degree and started teaching part-time at a school Dante donated enough money to that they built an entire new wing in her mother's name. Dante slowly shifted his business toward more legitimate ventures, trying to build an empire his children could inherit without the stain of blood. It was slow work, complicated by years of violence and enemies who didn't forget. But he was determined. I want them to have choices, he told Elena one night after the kids were asleep. Real choices, not the kind backed by desperation or necessity. I want them to choose their lives freely. Like you gave me, Elena said. Exactly like I gave you, Dante agreed. That's the only good thing I've ever done that I'm truly proud of, giving you a choice when you had none. I want to give that to them too. On their 7th wedding anniversary, Dante took Elena back to the hotel where they'd met. Not to the suite, but to the lobby, where she'd stood terrified and desperate, where everything had changed. Why are we here? Elena asked, confused. Dante took her hands, pulled her close. Because I want you to see how far we've come. I want you to remember that girl who walked in here, ready to do anything to survive. And I want you to see who she became. Strong, brave, a wife, a mother, a teacher, a force of nature who refuses to be defined by her worst moments. Elena's eyes filled with tears. I still have nightmares sometimes, she admitted. About that night. About what could have happened if you'd been different. If you'd taken what was offered instead of seeing who was offering it. I know, Dante said gently. But you're not that scared girl anymore. You're the woman who survived everything that should have destroyed her. You're the woman who taught me how to be human. You're the woman who gave me a family when I thought I'd live and die alone. You're my wife, Elena, my partner, the owner of my soul. And I need you to know how grateful I am that you walked through these doors 7 years ago. Elena sobbed, letting him hold her while she cried for the girl she'd been, for the desperation that had brought her here, for everything she'd survived to get to this moment. When she could breathe again, Dante wiped her tears and smiled. Come on, I have one more thing to show you. He led her outside to where a car was waiting, but instead of going home, he drove to a building Elena didn't recognize. It was in a nice neighborhood, newly renovated, with a sign out front that read, Sophia's house. What is this? Elena asked. It's a shelter, Dante explained, for women in desperate circumstances. Women like you were. I bought the building, funded it completely, staffed it with people who actually care. And I'm putting it in your name. You'll run it however you want, help whoever needs help. Save as many people as you can. Consider it my way of paying forward what you gave me. Elena stared at the building, at this tangible proof that Dante understood her, knew what mattered to her, wanted to help her make a difference. You named it after our daughter, she whispered. I named it after the 2 most important women in my life, Dante corrected. After the girl who survived, and the baby who proved that broken people can create beautiful things. It felt right. Elena turned to him, this dangerous, beautiful man who'd given her everything, who'd seen her at her worst and loved her anyway, who continued to prove every day that he was capable of more than violence and darkness. I love you, she said, more than I thought I could love anyone. You saved me, Dante, in every way that matters. No, Dante said, pulling her close. We saved each other. That's what makes this work. We're both survivors, both fighters, both people who refuse to let the worst moments define us. We chose each other freely, built something real from nothing, and created a life that matters. That's not me saving you, or you saving me. That's us saving each other. Elena kissed him, there on the street outside the shelter that bore their daughter's name, and felt the last pieces of her old fear and shame fall away. She wasn't a desperate girl anymore. She was a woman who'd survived, who'd found love in darkness, who'd built a family from desperation and choice, and the kind of courage it takes to keep going when everything says to give up. Over the next few years, Elena ran Sophia's house with the same fierce determination she'd applied to surviving. She helped hundreds of women find their way out of desperate circumstances, gave them choices when they had none, showed them that survival was just the beginning, not the end. Dante supported her completely, using his resources and connections to make sure every woman who walked through those doors had real options, real chances, real futures. Some of the women stayed, becoming staff members who understood what it meant to need help. Some moved on to build lives they'd never imagined possible. All of them knew Elena's story, knew she'd been where they were, knew she understood in ways that couldn't be faked, and that made all the difference. Dante watched his wife transform from someone who'd needed saving to someone who saved others, and he fell in love with her all over again. She was stronger now, more confident, more certain of her worth and her place in the world, but she still had moments of vulnerability, still woke sometimes from nightmares, still needed him to hold her and remind her she was safe. And he was always there, would always be there, because saving each other was what they did best. Their children grew, beautiful and loved and aware that their family was different, but never feeling less than because of it. Sophia became fierce and compassionate like her mother, protective like her father. Marcus was gentle and thoughtful, with a smile that could disarm anyone. They both knew their father's business wasn't entirely legal, but they also saw the good he did, the way he provided for their family, the way he loved their mother completely and without reservation. And they learned from him that people were complicated, that good and bad could exist in the same person, that love was always worth fighting for. When Sophia was 13, she asked Elena about the night she met Dante, about the circumstances that had brought them together. Elena had always planned to tell her children the truth eventually, when they were old enough to understand, and she realized the time had come. They sat together in the garden behind their house, just the two of them, and Elena told her daughter everything, about her grandmother's death, about the debt, about the desperation that had driven her to that hotel room, about Dante giving her a choice when she had none. Sophia listened without interrupting, and when Elena finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Mom," she finally said, "you're the strongest person I know." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I don't always feel strong." "That's what makes you strong," Sophia said with wisdom beyond her years. "You feel everything, all the fear and doubt and pain, and you keep going anyway. You survived the worst and built something beautiful from it. You taught me that we don't have to be defined by our worst moments, that we can be more than our circumstances. And you showed me what real love looks like, the kind that sees all your darkness and doesn't run. That's strength, Mom. That's everything." Elena pulled her daughter close, overwhelmed by how much she loved this fierce, brilliant girl who understood things Elena was still learning. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for understanding, for being exactly who you are." "I learned from the best," Sophia said simply. That night, Elena told Dante about the conversation with their daughter, and they both cried, overwhelmed by the realization that they'd raised children who understood complexity, who saw past surface judgments, who knew that love was the most important thing. Elena stood in front of Sophia's house 10 years after Dante had given it to her, watching women come and go, each one carrying their own stories of desperation and survival. She was 40 now, with threads of gray in her hair and laugh lines around her eyes, and the kind of confidence that came from surviving everything that should have destroyed her. Dante stood beside her, his arm around her waist, still as dangerous and beautiful as the day she'd met him, though his hair was graying at the temples, and his face showed the years of difficult choices he'd made. Their children were inside, Sophia volunteering as she did every weekend, Marcus playing with some of the residents' kids, both of them completely comfortable in this space that represented everything their parents believed in. You know what I think about sometimes? Elena said quietly. Dante looked down at her. What's that? I think about that girl who walked into the hotel, how terrified she was, how certain she was that she'd never be whole again, how she thought selling pieces of herself was the only way forward. Elena paused, watching a young woman emerge from the building, smiling for the first time in probably weeks. And I wish I could go back and tell her it would be okay, that she'd survive, that she'd find love in the strangest place, that she'd build a life worth living. She wouldn't have believed you, Dante said. Probably not, Elena agreed. But maybe she would have been a little less scared, a little more hopeful, a little more willing to believe in futures and possibilities, and the idea that the worst moment doesn't have to be the defining moment. Dante pulled her closer. You know what I wish? What? I wish I could go back and thank that girl for being brave enough to walk through those doors, for being desperate enough to reach for help, for surviving long enough to meet me, because without her courage, without her refusal to give up, even when everything said to quit, I'd still be that man who lived in darkness and violence with no idea there was another way. Elena looked up at him, this man who'd given her everything, who'd seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself, who'd built a life with her that was messy and complicated and absolutely beautiful. We saved each other, she said, echoing words he'd said years ago. We did, Dante agreed, and we'll keep saving each other, every day for the rest of our lives. They stood there as the sun set over the city, two people who'd found each other in desperation and built something that transcended their circumstances. Elena thought about all the women she'd helped, all the lives she'd touched, all the second chances she'd been able to give because Dante had given her one first. And she realized that her worst moment, that night in the hotel when she'd been prepared to sell herself just to survive, hadn't been her defining moment at all. Her defining moment had been every choice she'd made after that. The choice to trust Dante, the choice to accept help, the choice to heal, the choice to love despite fear, the choice to build a life instead of just surviving, the choice to help others the way she'd been helped. Those were the moments that defined her, not the desperation, but what she'd done with the salvation that came from it. I love you, she said to Dante. Still. Always. Forever. I love you too, Dante replied. My salvation, my soul, my Elena. And maybe that's the truth we all need to understand, that our worst moments don't define us unless we let them. That desperation can lead to salvation if we're brave enough to reach for it. That love can exist in the darkest places if we're courageous enough to trust it. That we're not too broken to be loved completely. We just need to find someone whose love is big enough to embrace all our pieces. Elena had given her virginity to a stranger to survive one night, and he'd turned out to be the man who would give her a lifetime. The Mafia boss who owned her soul, but only because she'd given it freely, completely, joyfully. And in giving it, she'd found her own power, her own strength, her own worth. Sometimes survival leads to salvation. Sometimes desperation leads to love. Sometimes the worst decision becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. You just have to be brave enough to see it through, strong enough to keep going, and wise enough to recognize that being saved and saving yourself are the same thing when you do it with someone who loves you completely. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from, and if you felt it was really worth it, consider becoming a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt this story was really worth listening to, also click the super thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us continue creating stories that touch the soul. Stories about survival and love and the courage it takes to reach for happiness even when everything says to give up. Because we all deserve to be loved completely, to find our person, to build lives that matter. And sometimes those lives start in the most unexpected, most desperate, most beautiful moments. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And remember, you're not too much. You're exactly enough. You just need to find someone big enough to love all of you.